The moment Ambassador Kale of Zeltox stepped into the Earth delegation chamber aboard the Galactic Concorde, he knew something was off. Not from the flickering translation matrix or the flickering light panel, both quirks common to interstellar conferences, but from the humans themselves. They sat slouched in their high-backed chairs, their eyes glazed, their responses delayed. This was not the commanding, hyper-efficient species Kale had studied through thousands of hours of archival footage. These humans were groggy. Opposite Kale sat Ambassador Miriam Soto, the leading human diplomat for Sector 9. Her brown leather blazer was sharp, her posture proper, but her fingers twitched restlessly around a white ceramic mug. She had not spoken more than a monosyllabic greeting. Her aides were no better, whispering among themselves, making subtle glances at a machine in the corner of the chamber that, from its rhythmic hissing, Kale assumed was some sort of life support unit. "This is the appointed time," Kale said, tapping his clawed fingers against the polished surface of the negotiation table. "Shall we begin the treaty exchange?" Miriam blinked slowly. She glanced at the mug again. "Just a moment. We need a few minutes." Kale's cranial ridges twitched. "Is there a technical difficulty? We were told your systems were fully operational." "No, it's—" She looked to her aide, a tired man in an ill-fitting blazer, who answered for her. "The coffee machine is recalibrating. Should be just another 5 minutes." "Coffee," Kale repeated, testing the word like a foreign particle on his tongue. "I fail to understand the relevance." Miriam finally made eye contact. Her tone was calm, but final. "We don't start negotiations without coffee." Kale leaned back, confused. "You are refusing a peace treaty because of a beverage?" "No," she said. "We're delaying it because we wanted to work." There was no malice in her voice, no condescension either. Kale had encountered many forms of arrogance in his decades as a diplomat. This wasn't one of them. This was a ritual. A silence spread across the chamber, broken only by the hiss and sputter of the coffee machine. Kale tapped into his translator implant, pulling archived Earth footage. He found countless meetings, interviews, even crisis summits, each beginning with a cup in hand, a quiet sip, a moment of silence. A pattern, a rhythm. He turned to his aide, a younger Zeltoxi with metallic blue skin and the enthusiasm of someone who had never seen a negotiation go south. "Is this normal?" Kale asked. The aide shrugged. "There are more images of humans holding mugs than there are of them smiling. Perhaps it is ceremonial." The coffee machine beeped. Every human in the room visibly straightened. Miriam took the first cup, steam curling upward like a summoned spirit. She inhaled, eyes closed before sipping. A transformation followed, subtle but powerful. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes sharpened. She was awake, present. "All right," she said, placing the mug down with soft finality. "Let's begin." Kale found himself hesitating, not from intimidation, but from intrigue. He had faced warlords and governors, but never a species that bound its attention span to liquid stimulation. He didn't understand it, but he respected its consistency. As the negotiations opened, Miriam was a different person. Poised, quick-witted, warm when needed, firm when not. She referred to past agreements, proposed new compromises, and even joked, lightly, but enough to suggest she was not just performing, but participating. Kale countered, but found himself adapting to her rhythm. The humans, now caffeinated, operated as a collective mind, finishing each other's thoughts, adjusting minor clauses, translating complex emotion into legal language. The machine that had sputtered earlier now sat quiet, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. Hours passed. Kale noticed the difference in his own demeanor. He was less guarded, more responsive. His aide whispered a curious suggestion. Perhaps they should integrate similar stimulants into their own diplomatic protocols. By the session's end, they had forged the outline of the first interstellar non-aggression pact between Earth and Zeltox. There were edits to be made, formal signatures to be obtained, but the work, the true diplomatic labor, had been completed. Kale waited as Miriam gathered her documents. "Tell me," he asked, gesturing to the empty mug, "do you genuinely believe your negotiations would have failed without it?" She looked down at the mug, then back at him. Not failed, but they would have been slower, rougher. Coffee doesn't make the decisions. It just helps us be who we are when we do. It was a curious thought that clarity came not from the soul alone, but from something external. In Zeltoxy culture, clarity came from stillness, from years of meditation. But here, it came in a steaming cup before a word had been spoken. As they stood to leave, Kale looked once more at the machine. Mundane in design, revered in practice. Perhaps, he thought, understanding a species means accepting the seemingly absurd parts too. He smiled, just slightly, barely perceptible unless you knew how Zeltoxy ridges curved when amused. Next time, he said, perhaps I'll join you. And Miriam, already halfway through her second cup, replied without missing a beat, only if you take it black. The door closed behind them, but the scent of roasted beans lingered, warm and inviting, a silent testament that sometimes the path to peace begins with a pause. The summit on Argus Station had been planned for 6 Earth months, which, as Ambassador Miriam Soto liked to say, was 5 months and 29 days longer than the average human attention span. Still, this was historic. The first multilateral agreement between Earth and 3 newly contacted species, the Zeltoxy, the Orovans, and the Krill. It was to be a testament to unity, compromise, and shared futures. Except the coffee machine had broken. It had happened 23 minutes before the session. Miriam, already feeling the gnaw of nerves and the early buzz of diplomacy, had pressed the familiar silver button, expecting the comforting hiss and gurgle. Instead, there was a clunk, then silence. "Don't do this to me," she muttered, crouching in front of the machine like a priest before an unresponsive altar. Her aide, Nolan, had already begun a frantic scan of the auxiliary galley. The backup machine, once stationed outside the Martian delegation's chambers, had apparently been removed for engineering assessments. Kale arrived first, punctual and unreadable as always. His dark eyes narrowed slightly at Miriam's distracted greeting. The Orevan emissary, a creature of near-translucent grace, floated in soon after, trailed by an entourage of assistants who pulsed gently with shifting colors. The Krill ambassador, an armored quadruped whose species had evolved in volcanic tunnels, arrived last, steaming slightly from a protective exosuit. Miriam tried to rally. She straightened her blazer, rehearsed the opening lines in her head, and ignored the dull ache behind her eyes. She would make this work. Caffeine or no caffeine. She rose and took her seat at the curved negotiation table, its surface glowing faintly with embedded sensor tech. A recorded chime signaled the beginning of proceedings. "Welcome, honored delegates," she began, voice steady but lacking her usual warmth. "Today marks a step forward in." "Your rhythms are off," the Orevan emissary interrupted, its voice a harmonic whisper that resonated in the bones more than the ears. Miriam blinked. "I assure you, we are fully prepared to proceed." The Krill ambassador let out a low rumble. "The human is disjointed, like a cracked stone. Should we delay?" Kale tilted his head. "Perhaps." The coffee again. Miriam sighed. "The machine is down. It's not critical." No one spoke. It was as though an invisible hand had smothered the air in the room. The silence stretched. The Krill twitched its armored limbs. The Orevan emissary slowly shifted from blue to a muted gray. Disapproval, if the guidebook was right. Kale leaned forward. "Ambassador Soto, when Zeltox and Earth signed our first accord, I believe your coffee delay to be superstition. A ritual, but I have since reconsidered. You are not functioning at optimal efficiency. You are fractured." The words, spoken plainly and without insult, hit her harder than expected. She felt Nolan's nervous gaze from across the room. "The thing is," she said, choosing her words carefully, "coffee isn't magic. It's just part of the rhythm. We're a species that wakes up slowly. We need the ceremony. It's not about the drink. It's about the space it gives us to breathe before we start." The Krill ambassador snorted, a puff of steam escaping its vents. "Then bring your ceremonial drink. We will wait." Nolan stood. "We've identified a functioning unit in the maintenance wing. 15 minutes round trip." Miriam looked around the room. She had a choice: force through the treaty half awake, or delay, and potentially gain their respect. She stood. Very well. We take a break. As her team moved swiftly to retrieve the machine, the aliens retreated to their respective zones. Kale remained seated. Why did you not delay earlier? He asked quietly. Pride, she admitted, or fear that you'd see it as weakness. Kale gave a slow nod. The weakness would have been to proceed unbalanced. 15 minutes later, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee spread through the chamber like a reconciling breeze. Miriam took her cup with reverence, inhaled deeply, then sipped. The fog behind her eyes lifted. Her posture realigned. Her thoughts clicked into place. She looked to the Oravan emissary, who now glowed a calm shade of green. Shall we begin again? This time, there were no interruptions. The treaty unfolded like a well-written score. Points of contention softened under mutual curiosity. The Krill offered security guarantees in exchange for geothermal tech. The Oravans requested art exchanges as a cultural bridge. Kale, as always, was incisive and meticulous, but cooperative. It wasn't easy, but it flowed. Hours later, as the delegates stood to leave, Kale approached her once more. You were right, about the space before the start. Miriam offered a tired smile. Sometimes peace just needs a pause. Behind them, the coffee machine let out one final, satisfied hiss. 3 weeks after the summit on Argus Station, the first cracks began to show. Not in the treaty, but in the fabric that held it, routine. Earth's delegation had returned to orbit around Luna Base, and despite the historic accord, tension simmered. Delegates from Krill, Orava, and Zeltox began requesting addendums, renegotiations, clarifications. Most of it was diplomatic inertia, a typical post-signature wobble. But Miriam sensed something deeper, something misaligned. Kale's message arrived through the secure relay at 0430. The subject line was sparse, urgent. Protocol reassessment. Miriam read it twice before initiating the live channel. His face blinked onto the screen, composed, but unusually tight around the eyes. They're stalling, Kale said. The Oravans have delayed the cultural handoff. The Krill Council now wants quarterly rather than annual inspections. And I've reviewed the Zeltoxy delegation's most recent edits. We're contradicting ourselves. We expected this, she replied. Early tremors after a big shift. No, he said. These are not tremors. They're recalibrations. They believe your side is losing equilibrium. Miriam leaned back in her chair, the edge of a headache already rising. We've held up our end. Externally, yes. But internally, they believe your behavior has changed. Less cohesion, less clarity. One Oravan report described your last summit as fractured warmth. She rubbed her temples. Nolan, who had joined quietly, now looked concerned. We haven't had consistent briefings since returning, he admitted. And we stopped the morning ritual. Miriam's eyes flicked to the unused coffee machine on the side table. They hadn't touched it in days. Caught in the flurry of follow-ups, briefings, and policy drafts, they'd streamlined everything. Efficiency had replaced presence, and something subtle had gone missing with it. Kale studied her face, then said with quiet finality, they associate your reliability with rhythm. You changed yours. Now they're watching. It sounded ridiculous. And yet, as she sat in the cold glow of the monitor, she knew he was right. The next day, she reinstated the ritual. Not just the coffee, though that returned, brewed strong and shared in silence, but the entire cadence. She held 10-minute pauses before meetings, opened every summit with a grounding breath, a small exchange of pleasantries, a moment to let presence take root. Word spread quickly. The Zeltoxy retracted 3 of their most redundant edits. The Krill envoy sent a formal appreciation note for restored balance. The Oravans resumed their color-shifting conversations, this time pulsing warm yellow and soft green. And yet, despite the recovery, the real test came at the Renewal Summit, scheduled exactly 1 lunar cycle after the treaty signing. This time, it was Earth's turn to host. The chamber aboard the Celestial Accord, a newly commissioned orbiting conference platform, shimmered with polished steel and recycled starlight. Delegates arrived in ceremonial attire. Holographic seals flickered across the ceiling, representing each world's sovereignty. Miriam stood at the head of the room, coffee in hand, but with a stillness that came from practice, not nerves. Kale approached and bowed his head. "Ambassador Soto," he said, "is your rhythm restored?" She raised her cup slightly. "One sip at a time." He smiled, ever so slightly, and took the seat beside her. The session opened with poetry, an unexpected inclusion from the Oravans, whose emissary translated each stanza into harmonic tones. The Krill shared a geological sculpture created from core samples collected during their Earth visit. Kale offered a recounting of the treaty's forging, crediting, much to her embarrassment, human warmth and caffeine. But what truly marked the summit's success was the quiet. Not silence, but space. Room between statements. Breathing time between clauses. Every gesture was deliberate. No rush to conclusions. Even disagreement came with grace. At the session's close, as the final protocols were signed, the Krill ambassador spoke directly to Miriam, voice resonant and solemn. "Your kind is not merely unpredictable. You are cyclical, like magma beneath stone, cool on the surface, but always moving." Miriam bowed slightly. "And your kind knows how to listen to the earth." The Oravan emissary shimmered with soft rose light. "We feared you'd lost your center. But now we see. It was only obscured." Miriam nodded, but it was Kale's final words that lingered long after. "You have taught us the importance of pause, of ritual, and that no treaty is ever truly signed. It is renewed with every shared breath." Later, back in her private quarters, she sat alone with her coffee. Not out of habit, but intention. The treaty would hold. Not because of signatures or clauses, but because the species that forged it had learned each other's rhythms. And, more importantly, respected them. The stars outside pulsed in quiet symphony. And she, like them, moved in time.